What we want to do now, and I think I hit my marks from a timing perspective, is invite Tiff back up to the stage and be joined by a couple folks. First, Rebecca Yu. Rebecca is the head of JLABS here in Toronto. Johnson & Johnson's Innovation's first JLABS incubator outside of the United States. JLABS is a partnership with Johnson & Johnson Innovation, Janssen Canada, at the University of Toronto, and the Mars Discovery District. Rebecca is a graduate of a school known as the University of Toronto, the Faculty of Pharmacy, and is currently a pharmacist in Ontario. JLABS is an incredible investment that the industry has made that sometimes we don't hear enough about, and so we wanted to make sure we brought that to bear. We'll also be joined by Iliana Oris Valiente. Iliana is widely credited for being a trailblazer in getting Deloitte actively involved in the blockchain space, something near and dear to the heart of both our institute upstairs and this school with Don Tapscott. She recognized the tremendous impact for enterprise clients. She is a chartered accountant by profession, and her focus has been on exponential technology, entrepreneurship, and bridging the gap between the corporate world and the startup communities. So with that, I'll welcome our panel to the stage.
Okay, well, Rebecca and Iliana, thank you both for joining us. You're going to raise the quality of this discussion tremendously. And, you know, as you've just heard, we've got at least two of the four sectors here represented. And Rebecca, maybe I could start with you. We talk in the report about the importance of labor, the importance of capital. We lament the fact that there isn't more R&D in health and medical devices. JLABS is a great success story. You know, you've come to Toronto. You're in Mars. You know, we need 10 more JLABS here in Toronto. So what attracted you to Toronto? Was it the labor? Was it the capital? What was it about Ontario that attracted you here? And you know, what would it take to grow the operation?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually started this journey 3 years ago before I head up JLABS Toronto. And at that time, we were, one of the small mandates we had it wasn't a small mandate, it was a pretty big mandate, was to bring more R&D into Canada and into Ontario. And at that time, I worked for a company by the name of Janssen Canada, which is the pharmaceutical division of Johnson & Johnson. And the leadership there said, you know, we need to look for ways to bring R&D here into the province in which we have been doing very well from a business standpoint. The challenge is actually getting, and it was a learning experience for me because getting the attention of our global colleagues was not easy. It was a difficult path in terms of, you know, we're here, Canada is here, Ontario is here. You know, how do we sort of say to them, can you fly in here and just take a look at some of the great stuff that's happening here? It seems easy, but it's not as easy as it seems. And it's funny, since then I've talked to a couple of my colleagues from other pharmaceutical companies, and one of the companies said, you know, twice a year is the most they can get some of their global colleagues to come in to here to actually see the science in this place. So we started small. I don't think we started right away with JLABS. We actually started with bringing in one of our global head of neuroscience into the region here to take a look at the great science that's in this space. And as a result, we ended up with a great collaboration with the University of Toronto. And it's called Neuroscience Catalyst, and it's an Alzheimer's open, no strings attached, open source type of collaboration looking at Alzheimer's. And that actually, what happened was then one person talked to another person that said, did you know there's great science happening here in Toronto? Did you know that U of T is second to Harvard in peer-reviewed published literature, and how come we don't know this? And there was pictures taken, and, you know, next thing I know, I've got folks coming in from California that my current boss right now came in. She saw it, and then we've flown in our chief scientific officer. And I can tell you, working together with Mars and U of T, we brought in all the great researchers in the region, and he looked at the science here and just thought it was amazing. He looked at University Avenue, he saw University of Toronto just north of it, and he said, you know, why don't we have anybody here? How come we didn't know about this? And so, you know, the next step was we coordinated a meeting with him and the Premier, and that was about 3 years ago, and since then, we are here. And we're very excited. And I can tell you, with our grand opening, we have 60 people from Global coming into the space, leadership, and they are definitely invested into this region. We are trying hard to actually promote this to our peers and asking our leadership to tell other companies, because it can't just be J&J being here. To build an ecosystem, we need other companies to come. So we have been working very hard to invite a lot of my peers. Recently, we brought in our competitor, AbbVie Ventures from Boston. They came in for an event, and they said, I didn't realize there was such great stuff happening here. So my learning from that experience is we need to do a better job of selling ourselves. I don't think we do. Maybe it's a Canadian way. Yeah.
Okay, more branding. We need to get out there and sell our best features. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the environment here is fabulous, but we got to get that message out there.
Sorry, I was just going to add, maybe also leverage. I know we talk a lot about the fact that in the report there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies here in this space, and they're all commercial. Leverage them and pressure them to go out there and go out there and say, to our global colleagues, come invite your folks here. If your science is amazing here. And it's not been highlighted to the extent it should have been.
Thank you. So, Iliana, I'm going to now ask you a very similar question. You're at Deloitte. You've been working a lot on blockchain, a potentially transformational technology that can be has large applications in financial services, although it could also be applied in health and all sorts of things. One of the things we're seeing in the financial services fintech space is, I would say, a year or two ago, the fintechs were going to take over the world. They were going to obliterate the big bad banks, and we were just going to be able to do everything anytime, anywhere, mobile. Increasingly, you're actually seeing a lot of fintechs now partnering with large financial institutions. Large financial institutions have customers. They have data. Those are things that fintechs need. Blockchain. I'd be interested in your sense of, is this a positive development that they're starting to work together, or are we sort of forgetting about the disruptive element? Is this too cozy? What's it going to take to make Toronto a global hub for innovation, disruption in financial services?
Well, I would say it's a bit of both when it comes to both collaborating but also remaining on the edge of disruption and making sure that you're pushing the boundaries. Now, I remember a couple of years ago when I started in the blockchain space, and I was working with a number of startups who were building the next generation protocols and products and platforms, and they were coming to me and asking, could you broker an introduction to bank so-and-so or this other financial institution? We have a product that we think is going to completely change the game. But what they didn't or couldn't articulate at the time was how they would be partnering with said institutions rather than walking in with a product or idea that would just be completely disruptive and therefore competitive and therefore probably would not get the right attention from these institutions. Over the past couple of years, what's been really interesting is the shift in the conversation towards identifying more opportunities for legitimate collaboration. And it goes in line with the banks opening up their APIs, for example, and setting up innovation labs where they're looking to foster real and meaningful relationships to figure out how you move that industry forward. And at the end of the day, what we often forget about when we talk about blockchain technology is that similar to the introduction of the telephone or the introduction of the internet, these are all network technologies. You can't go very far without inviting other players to the table. And whether it's within one industry like financial services or within the healthcare space or in certain use cases, we're seeing collaboration being required between healthcare providers, insurance companies, individuals, governments, and so on. So it really does need to be a broader play here.
Good. Can I ask a question there, Tiff? I'm a recovering lawyer. And so the thing I haven't shaken yet is risk aversion, I suppose, to a certain extent. I want you to imagine you're waking up this morning, instead of being on the disruptive technology side, you're on the regulator side. So how, because if I'm the regulator and I hear we're going to develop a game-changing technology, I start sweating and maybe shaking a little. So how should they approach fintech, and how can they be that innovative regulator that we want them to be?
Ideally, if there are any regulators in the room, this is all for you. Pay attention, learn, get the real scoop, and then figure out ways that you can reduce the risks as much as possible, mitigating them from a financial protection perspective for consumers, but don't make any rash decisions. In the blockchain space, there is one jurisdiction that I can point to as a case study of what not to do, and that's the state of New York, where last summer they issued something called the bid license, and it was a set of wide regulations that applies to any exchange that would qualify as being a money services business. And the types of requirements that these companies to comply with was very similar to what you'd find in the traditional FSI space. And I remember sitting there, printing out a copy of the bid license and highlighting all of the potential areas where our team had the ability to help these startups. And then I stopped. I was like, wait a second, I've just highlighted 7 pages out of a 15-page report. These are startups. They don't have money. They don't have the time to spend complying with these things. They're busy still trying to solve the low-level technological challenges that are required for their technology to ever see the light of day. And the approach I would suggest that the regulators take is more akin to what we're starting to see the Ontario Securities Commission doing, what we're seeing happening in Singapore, in the UK, where they're creating sandbox environments and saying, here's a safe place, go play. We will surround you with advisors who understand innovation and whose first instinct is not going to be a knee-jerk reaction and saying, no, you can't, but rather, let's try to figure this out.
That was very good advice, and I'm just going to highlight one thing you actually mentioned because we've been helping them with it. You know, the OSC actually, I think, is providing some leadership in this space. And just to give you sort of one very practical example, so they're running a pilot now, so we've helped them with this. So we have a seed stage accelerator here, the Creative Destruction Lab. Next Canada is another organization that we do some work with. Again, you know, it's about getting people into entrepreneurship. And so the OSC is now allowing AngelList on a pilot basis AngelList basically does crowdfunding. So to crowdfund some of these ventures. So they're using, so they know us well. They know we provide we're a neutral environment. We're here at a university. We've got a proven track record. So we've partnered. We've helped the OSC run this pilot. And so, you know, that is one practical thing you can do on a small scale in a kind of controlled setting to see if we can improve access to capital in Ontario. You know, that's the kind of thing, and you had a number of other excellent examples. So I hope there were some regulators listening. Okay, I want to get a little more pointy now. So you've talked about why you're here. You've talked about what the opportunities are. And I come back to you, Rebecca. You know, maybe you could say a little bit about what is the biggest constraint on growth for you? Is it finding the right scientific skill sets you need? Is it soft skills? Is it access to capital? Is it you need a hyperloop to Waterloo? Like what is it? Like, you know, if you could get one thing, what would it be?
It'd be access to capital for the company. So not for us. I think all the companies that's come in. So the one thing that we've noticed. So this is the first site outside the U.S. The 6th one. We've compared to all the other companies in our other sites. The amount of dollars they have, much less. And, you know, our 5 other sites are, of course, all in the U.S. The amount of capital they have coming in is very small. And, you know, I'm focusing more on the stage life sciences. And, yes, there's capital in the country, but not a lot for early stage life sciences because it takes risk, right? And I think the investors in Canada typically are more risk averse. And unfortunately, you have great science here, but they can't actually validate it and get the crucial data that they need to show the hypothesis is actually going to the right direction. For an investor, a VC coming in from Boston or even a J&J and other companies to actually invest in that company. So either the company dies or it goes to, and we have one of them here in our space that has some footprint at JLABS, they go to Boston because that's where the VCs are. Right? And that's where they have support, and that's where the talent is. And, you know, that particular technology came from UHN. So we see it over and over again. So we can provide, right now with JLABS, every one of our companies is hooked up with somebody within J&J. We call them a liaison. And it's no strings attached, so we don't own any IP, no first rights, and unless both sides agree, we don't see confidential information. So that mentor actually provides support in terms of science, if they need to know business development. So we can teach them all of that. But if they don't have the seed capital to say, we need that capital to show that hypotheses, then no matter how many investors we bring in from Boston to meet with the companies, they're not going to put the investment in. There is investment out there from the government. I really like the saying about double down, because what I see is there's money everywhere, but it's spread everywhere. So there's pockets of different spaces everywhere, as opposed to focusing in the areas that they're really, like, what is it that Ontario is really good at? If it's neuroscience, hypothetically, infectious disease, focus on that. But it's spread so wide apart that people just a little bit, some of these companies, they just need like a couple $100,000. And that could just take them, and if you think about the investment in University Avenue and everything else, that's small in comparison if that company is going to die.
Okay. Sounds like we have some work to do there. Thank you. So you get to see a lot of companies at Deloitte. What do you see? What is the, what's the thing that's holding them back more than anything? Is it capital? Or is it something else?
It's capital, yes, but in a very specific form. What we're seeing a lack of in the industry is a willingness to invest patiently in research and development, where the technology at hand, blockchain, is very new. And if you come into a business and you say, here's a transformative potential of this new thing, say, well, does it meet requirements A, B, C, and D? And the answer right now is no, it doesn't yet, because there hasn't been enough on the ground work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no potential for it. And so you have these startups and you have these upstarts that are spending a lot of time trying to get their businesses up and off the ground. They may be getting VC investment into the technology piece, but now they need to go and test it. They need a real life use case. They need to partner with an institution that has the clients, that has the data that they can funnel through their systems in order to be able to verify some of their claims to fame around being able to process a large data set. And it's that investment, which isn't always money, but sometimes is time and the willingness to explore, that is potentially holding a number of these companies back.
I'm going to open it up for audience in a second, but one final question. I mean, much of what we've talked about in the annual report is a lot of it's pretty large companies. These are big businesses. Part of that is the ecosystem of smaller startups feeding that. How well do you think we're doing in terms of bigger companies reinventing themselves, being more innovative? I mean, the reality is if we really want to move the dial on R&D, yes, we need some startups, we need some success stories, but we need some big, successful companies. The reality is if you look at Canada's R&D performance, it's gone down in recent years. The reason it's gone down is that Nortel's bankrupt, BlackBerry's been struggling, and Bombardier's having a tough time. These are the companies that do, most of the R&D in this country. How well are we doing in terms of having these bigger companies reinventing themselves? Have they got it?
They're certainly trying. We will give them credit. But we also can't underestimate the power of motivations and what that means sometimes. For example, in a space that is promised to be disintermediated to a large extent with new efficiencies programmed into the technology, if you are an incumbent in the space of transaction processing, you're looking at this technology and saying, well, do I really want to be investing in something that has the potential to really disrupt my business model? And if I'm at a stage as a big corporate where your business model is fairly secure and there's that illusion of resiliency, then sometimes you may not want to make that huge leap in innovation. And on the other side, even if you're not at risk of being disrupted, there's no guarantee that the investment you're making today in that innovation is actually going to pan out. And if you have a choice between investing in the status quo, where you know that there will be a certain return, versus putting money down a potential black hole, and unless you're investing in a portfolio of innovations, what is it to guarantee that any one of those investment decisions is going to be the right one? And those are really the challenges that we see being faced in the industry by some of the larger players.
Is So J&J, it's a big company. How do they do it?
Well, part of the reason why JLABS is here, I mean, we were talking before, and you were saying, well, what's in it for J&J? Why are you doing this if there's no strings attached? I think J&J Innovation, under which JLABS is under umbrella of, was created because we recognize that going forward, we can't depend on internal R&D. So you found, HIV is now a chronic disease. A lot of the chronic illnesses in cardiovascular and COPD, for example, is all chronicized. The next step is really finding a cure for Alzheimer's or cancer. Well, we can't do that on our own. And so, if you look at some of our numbers of J&J, half of what we invest in is actually externally. So we recognize that we can't do it ourselves. So if we need to find something, the next step, which is transformational, it has to be through a collaboration. And you need to be able to work together by sharing our expertise, even with competitors, not just with, like universities, for example, but also between competitors.
Okay. We have time for a few questions. Okay, we've got a hand up right there. And give us your name, your question, and if you have a preferred answer, you can